Welcome to the Learn True Health podcast. I'm your host, Ashley James. This is episode 268. Today we have with us an inspirational guest who is here to help us understand mind-body medicine. Niki Gratrix is a renowned transformation coach, nutritional therapist, and bioenergetic practitioner. She loves helping people optimize their energy, but more so, she loves helping people to heal that emotional and physical health because of that mind-body connection. I'm so excited for you to come here today and share with our listeners and have them have a deeper understanding of their mind-body connection. Welcome to the show, Niki.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. Now, you have founded one of the largest mind-body clinics in integrative medicine in the UK. That's quite a feat. I'm really excited to hear all about your professional, bio and let the listeners know more about you. But first, I'd love to get into your personal story. What led you personally to want to pursue this as a career?
Well, actually, it's all intertwined. So, all the way back, just almost 15 years ago, I met my then partner, who also became my business partner, and he'd actually been ill with chronic fatigue syndrome very, very badly. Been ill for about 7 years, and he'd spent 2 of those years bedbound. And when I met him, he'd recovered, and I was just actually relaunching my career. I'd been a chartered accountant, and I'd actually been in the City of London for 7 years in banking and finance, totally unrelated. Realized that I hated that job and that I needed something with much more meaning and much more connecting and helping other people directly. So I was in the midst of changing my career, and I was just starting to train at the Institute for Optimal Nutrition, which is one of the top nutrition schools in the UK. And when I met my partner at the time, he, as I mentioned, had just recovered from chronic fatigue, but he was a psychology practitioner. And what we did is we co-founded this clinic together, this mind-body clinic. And obviously we were focusing on people with fatigue issues. But what we realized very early on, the partnership was very good, because we realized most chronic complex illnesses and most illnesses have an emotional component, a very important emotional component. And when that goes unaddressed, you don't get as good a results, basically, than if you address that. I'm a big fan of a multifactorial approach. So I'm not saying just to do psychology. I'm not just saying it's just emotional trauma related stuff, but it's a huge factor. And when you address that side, it makes what you do on the biochemistry work better. So that's essentially the sort of the genesis of the clinic, specializing in fatigue. It started in our front room, just the two of us, and I was like, the director of nutrition, and he was the director of psychology, and we ended up with 10 practitioners, and we had patients in 30, probably 40 different countries, and it was very, very large in the end. And then we won awards, and we actually got published a study. It was so big, there were so many people. We started to track our results, and we got published in the British Medical Journal Open, showing, looking at a group that was getting just nutrition, sort of functional medicine approach, just psychology, and a group that, was getting both. So, and that was published in 2012.
What were the results?
So significant improvement. That's how we got published. So, we were getting better results than some of the standard conventional interventions for chronic fatigue, which I have to say it's a pretty low bar, I have to say, in terms of what the conventional treatments are out there. But we were getting significant improvement and kind of confirmed efficacy, so of what we're doing. So we knew it was working, but it was nice to get it, scientifically validated. It was a preliminary study, so we didn't have a control group. That's the next stage that the clinic is doing, is a randomized controlled trial, which will kind of be the gold standard. But it was a very good start point. And then interestingly, after that point, I was always extremely motivated by and interested in psychology, consciousness, and the mind-body connection. So even though I did nutrition, I kind of then, when I left the clinic, I swapped over and I started to integrate everything. So I'd already trained in things like neuro-linguistic programming. I'm trained in emotional freedom technique and those kind of energy medicine related interventions for the emotional side as well. So now we kind of take this multifactorial approach.
So you started the clinic, but then you left your own clinic?
Yeah, I co-founded it, and then after 5 years, I moved on. Yeah, I got very interested in energy medicine. So one of the things about the clinic that I originally co-founded is that because it was going for an RCT, it had to fix what it was doing and not change anything. And I'm always looking for new modalities.
Oh.
Do you understand? Like, yeah, so
Mm-hmm.
that they were going off to go and get validated by convention. And I was still dissatisfied, and I wanted to go and bring in much more of the energetic side.
Right.
So I brought in, so I had psychology, I've got the nutrition, and brought in the energetic work. So and then I run a very, very large summit online. It was the largest ever summit on overcoming chronic fatigue, and I had all the people that from all those different modalities, world leading experts and so on, speaking about these different approaches. And essentially the message is, when you take this sort of multifactorial approach, you get better results.
Oh,
That's my experience.
absolutely. Well, congratulations on it was the Abundant Energy Summit.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah,
in
and
2015.
that is congratulations. You're so ahead of the curve in terms of, that was 2015. That was just when summits were really starting to become popular. And so you are a pioneer for sure.
Thank you.
Absolutely. It's funny. I've also studied NLP, and you have that NLP spirit of always striving for excellence and never settling for average or just good enough.
Exactly. Yes, that's me totally. It's always a kind of in development, never-ending improvement. Can I constant, never-ending improvement? That's it's something. It's a sort of value of mine. So I'm always looking at ways to improve things, bringing new things in, and I think that's just part of life. And it's the commitment to growth is kind of. It's just better to be that way, I think.
Mm-hmm. One
Yeah.
of the things in your bio is that you're a bioenergetic practitioner. I've never heard of that. Could you explain what that is? And do you still use that tool set?
Yes, absolutely. So, bioenergetics is the study of energy in living organisms. So, it's sort of the application of the science of physics as opposed to looking at everything from biochemistry, which is, what happens a lot in conventional medicine. So, I have a system that assesses and scans. It's called the NES system, and it scans the energy field and the energetics of the body. And on the basis of that, I use things called infoceuticals, which are like homeopathy 2.0. And we call it homeopathy 2.0 because it's not the old way that homeopathy works. It's still vibrational and frequency medicine, but with homeopathy, you kind of how you take like with like. So, if you have a bug, then you'll take the homeopathic version of that bug to clear it. And with infoceuticals, it's different. You actually give the positive information to the body rather than giving a bug. And so why not optimize the organs and systems in the body rather than trying to trigger a healing crisis by giving more of a bug, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So if someone has a headache, what's the opposite energy of a headache, and how would you render that into a medicine?
Yes, so it's very interesting. So something like an infoceutical would contain the optimum information for the meridians that would be involved with a headache. Energetic drivers, we call them energetic drivers, at the information fields around organs and systems in the body, and the meridian systems. And they could be multiple different systems. It doesn't have to be in the head that could be causing a headache. So what we do is we say, okay, let's look at, Chinese meridian number 3, and let's give the optimum information to correct any disturbance in that meridian. Let's give the optimum information to correct any disturbance, say, in the liver or, digestion. So we optimize to make those organs work better. So once that's done, then that can clear the headache. So which is different than sort of giving something like a virus. Perhaps the headache's being caused by some kind of bug, and then you would give the vibration of the virus to kind of trigger the body's own healing response. That's classical homeopathy. So this is like next level. It's called the NES system. So I've been using that for about 2 or 3 years in combination with using psychology techniques and things like this.
NES system, is it NES, and does that stand for anything?
Yeah, energetic system. So it's Yeah, and it was created by actually another English guy who'd been ill, very ill with chronic fatigue for 8 years and had recovered. And he worked with his name was Harry Massey, and he co-founded Ness Health with Peter Fraser, who was a professor of acupuncture from Australia. He was actually the guy who brought acupuncture into Australia. He'd been out into China and he'd really researched Chinese medicine. Traditional Chinese medicine, and then the two of them together kind of created this system together, and they healed Harry. And Peter was using all his, research and his system to cure that. And then they went off, and actually Harry went on to become a triple documentary filmmaker, and he's an amazing guy. So it's his system, and it's the Ness Health system. So I'm a Ness practitioner, as it's called.
And that bioenergetic practitioners, is that what that is?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah. And, it's kind of fuzzy because, anytime you're doing something which works with the energy fields of the body, that essentially that is bioenergetics. That's bioenergetic medicine. So I could be doing, say, the emotional freedom technique with somebody, and I'm tapping on the emotional freedom technique is tapping on puncture points on the face, the tapping points. And that is actually based in traditional Chinese medicine as well. So it's all connected. So it's basically in the wider realm of energy medicine is part of what I do.
Love it. Love it. And I mean, I guess I can't ask you what do you think works best because your whole philosophy is an integrative approach.
Exactly. And I think that this is the problem, that there's certain things that are downplayed.
Mm.
And we still, and you'll know this, but, I always talk about the fact we don't consider energetics and mindset enough when it comes to healing the physical body. And
Mhm.
yet truly, the mind and the body are truly one thing. They really are one thing. So,
Mhm.
what's happening for you psycho emotionally is going to get translated into the physical expression, whether that's epigenetically, which is directly doing epigenetically. It resets the nervous system, the neuroendocrine immune system. And, minute by minute, you can change the way your genes are expressing epigenetically by the way you think and feel.
I have, it's so funny. I love how life works because as an interviewer, um everything, it's like I see this web of everything being interconnected. I'll interview someone and then something they say sparks something in my life, and I'll meet someone that needs to hear that interview, or I'll meet someone who tells me about something and then I end up interviewing someone the next day because of that. Or like I walked through a drugstore once, so this was like about a year and a half ago, and I saw a book for sale. I just glanced at it while I was chasing my toddler through the drugstore, and the book said, like, the title of the book really stood out to me. I thought to myself, wow, that would be an interesting person to interview. And the next day, his office contacted me to be on my show. And so it's just, there's this web, like we are all really interconnected. And so my little personal experience is that yesterday, and I'm also an NLP practitioner. I'm like, I teach people for a living how to not have anxiety. So I've got all these tools in my tool belt. Something really stressful happened to me yesterday in my personal life. It was off the charts, and it took every ounce of my mindset to like keep myself together. But I felt it was really cool because I became the observer, observing my body going through what emotional stress happens to the body. My I had the worst nausea. I had the worst for the last 24 hours, the worst digestion. And I know it's all only from the stress. I eat really clean. There's nothing wrong with the diet. And then this morning I woke up feeling like my blood sugar was off, and I'm no longer diabetic, but I woke up feeling like I was hit like a Mack truck last night. I felt like I ate an entire chocolate cake or maybe down tequila. Like I felt hungover. I thought, man, it's so amazing how some emotional stress cascades into the body, and you will experience, in someone who is like disconnected from their emotions or isn't doesn't have tools to de-stress or to work through their emotions, it causes disease in the body. Just the emotional side alone can cause disease in the body. And luckily I was able to resolve the issue that and get over it, and the stress is gone, the stressor is gone, but I got to have this roller coaster in the last 24 hours. And it's so interesting that you're here today to teach us about this. And I think that what I'd love for the listeners to walk away with is a deeper awareness of that mind body connection, because something as simple as a stressor, if you don't learn how to handle it, or if you don't learn how to handle how to resolve emotions, then just holding on to those emotions or having them continually trigger in your life really can manifest as disease. And I'd love for you to talk about this because I know you're an expert in it.
Yeah, this is my area. This is like my favorite topic. Because truly. So I have to talk about, it's one of the most important studies ever done in medicine, because it really, if anybody has any doubt whatsoever that your emotional state impacts your physiology, there's a really important study that doesn't get enough exposure, and it's called the Adverse Childhood Events Study. And
Mm.
it was a study of 17,500 people done by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente. And it wasn't minority groups. It was kind of, your average Joe, white, middle class. So we couldn't just say the results were, just minority groups or some out there group. And essentially, they found 67% of all people have had one adverse childhood event. And if you had a high level of adverse childhood events, you have an increased risk of 7 out of the top 10 causes of death.
Oh.
If you have a moderate level, like 6 adverse childhood events, they call them ACEs, adverse childhood events. If you have 6, you have a 20-year reduction in lifespan. If you have just 4 ACEs, you have a 400% increase of depression, Alzheimer's, and dementia. You have almost 6-fold increased chance of getting chronic fatigue. Fibromyalgia's up there too. You have, and if you have, like, say, 8 ACEs, you have 3 times the risk of heart disease and triple the risk of 3.5 times the risk of lung cancer. So and basically things like autoimmunity is as strongly correlated as smoking and lung cancer for women. So if you've had ACEs in childhood and you're a woman, that's like smoking, and the correlation with adult onset chronic complex illness. So it's a gigantic study. It doesn't get enough exposure. And of course, what are we actually talking about when we say, and what is an ACE? Just so that people know. So in the study, they had 10 categories, and they were looking at things like parents separating or divorce, physical, sexual, or emotional abuse, physical or emotional neglect, domestic violence, incarceration by a family member, and substance abuse, this kind of thing. And it's very interesting because I just actually interviewed, like, literally the world leading expert on trauma, a brilliant man called Professor Bessel van der Kolk. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, and he said of that study, it's just the tip of the iceberg, because the questions were too superficial, and we can dig into that. Because as soon as I say, I've listed those things, everybody starts to think back to their childhood and go, how much of those did I have? But what goes missed, and it's the subtlety, and this is an area we can dig into. When we talk about emotional neglect and emotional trauma, this is subtle, and yet it can be devastating. So even if you don't think, you look back to your childhood and it's not necessarily, you can't see there wasn't an assault, there was no sexual abuse, you can't see anything sort of overt. There's an epidemic of emotional abuse, which we'll talk more about. But that study really brings it home, I think, that what happened, your stress levels directly impact your biology. And there were follow-up studies, because people were like, how is this happening? How is childhood biography becoming adult biology? And it was literally a neuroendocrine immune system reset is triggered from the date the trauma starts. So you're marinating in inflammatory cytokines and stress chemicals from an early age, from the date this trauma starts. So you've got that, your system is reset, and once you get into adulthood, there might be another trigger, another stressor. It might be an exposure to a chemical or a virus or another adult inevitable stressful event that we all go through. And that triggers the onset of a chronic complex illness. But actually, it started 20, 30 years before that. And that's the key piece to take away.
Is there something we can do to like clean up the trauma? There are so many techniques for releasing and healing trauma in the past, But is it hardwired if we had a certain amount of adrenaline or cortisol as a child because of stressors? Is this something that's just hardwired now, or can we heal it now as adults?
You can absolutely heal it. There's no question. So it's just a lot of people might not self-identify that they actually have this reset. And we'll talk about more of the symptoms of signs of trauma, especially if it was more of the what we call silent ACEs. But yes, so for example, if it was a singular, discrete event, kind of thing that you often hear about with war veterans and things like this, or a singular event like a hospitalization, a frightening car accident, something like that, where you might have developed post-traumatic stress disorder, for example, there's a lot of techniques out there that work you can pretty much cure that. They're pretty behind that. So all kinds of techniques will work. Cognitive behavioral therapy has been found to work. Something called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing is pretty good as well. That's called EMDR.
Mm-hmm.
So these are conventional treatments. So if you've got that kind of trauma and you know that you might have PTSD related to a singular event, absolutely you should go and get help. There's really good research out there. But there's another type of trauma, and to be honest, it's the most emotional trauma isn't from a single event.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually what we call relational trauma, and it's to do with our relations with other people and mainly our caregivers, obviously. So, and this time it's a type of ambient trauma. So it's not necessarily one thing, it's about were you seen, were you heard, when bad things happened, who was there to look after you, who made you feel safe, who cuddled you, who had your back. And it's really when we're not seen and when we're not heard and when that isn't there in childhood through sometimes stressful events, that trumps the event. So you could have a traumatic event, but if you have a very supportive, loving family, you can be very resilient and bounce back.
Mm-hmm.
So what trumps those events is this relational, and they're calling it developmental trauma. And this is really where my key interest is, because when you have that type of change that's happened, it leads to symptoms of things like perfectionism, a loss of self-care, a lack of feeling of safety in the body. It can lead to core feelings of shame. It leads to, kind of all the addictions come from this as well, by the way. The ACEs study really confirmed that this is where the cause of addiction is usually unresolved trauma from childhood, because when we experience that, where we don't have that close support, the body registers it as heartache and gut wrench, and it makes the body go haywire. It changes the neurobiology, it changes everything. So that kind of emotional reset, sometimes people have lived with it for so long, it may manifest itself as, by the way, being easily triggered into anxiety. So it might get channeled into specific phobias that you might have as well. It's probably one of the main underlying causes of a lot of mental disorders as well: depression, anxiety, bipolar. And it also leads on, as I mentioned, to these types of behaviors like being an overgiver, a perfectionist, kind of the achiever type, because we're kind of making up for the fact that we just don't feel good in ourselves. It's kind of, there's something deficient going on. I don't feel quite right. I didn't get unconditional love and emotional bonding, so I have to earn it. And this is what we see in the burnout community. And this is how I got into all this, because it's chronic fatigue and burnout are like the poster illnesses for this kind of more subtle trauma, and it's epidemic. So it's not feeling okay in the body, and it leads to changes in neurobiology and changes in our behavior. So where we start to lose the self-care, discount our own needs, put everybody else before ourselves. So, and a lot of people haven't looked into that. They suddenly they get an autoimmune disease. Suddenly they have post-exertional fatigue and they have a diagnosis of chronic fatigue. They go straight down the diet route, straight down the medical drug route, fix my digestion, tell me what pill to take. And it's like, no, you need to create a sense of comfort and safety in your body and reset the nervous system with psychology techniques as well, usually. And that's the kind of upshot from it all.
That makes so much sense. Now, these ACEs when does childhood end? I mean, early 20s? Like, could something traumatic happen in our early 20s and that be considered an ACE, or does it have to be when we're sort of a vulnerable child?
Officially it's before age 18. the official sort of cutoff point that they were asking about. So experiencing, and obviously childhood before the age of 18 is when the brain's still developing. So it's obviously very imprintable still at that age. So it has more of a profound impact. But it's so important because it sets us up for adulthood. So how we respond to adult stress, the inevitable stresses of adulthood, is often set up by how much resilience and inner resources we were given as a child. So you'll often see when, kind of somebody collapses in the face of a major traumatic event in adulthood, sometimes you can link that back to, yes, trouble with childhood kind of connection and being made to feel that, you're an important, lovable, person who's needed and wanted on the planet. And unfortunately, we have a great big sort of self-love deficit disorder happening, and that makes us less resilient to stress in adulthood as well, which is why there's so much emphasis on what happens in childhood. It also sets up your adult relations. So we tend to, how we attached with our key caregivers, I think most people know this, you end up marrying your mom or your dad. So, and you see these people who keep getting bad relations with people, they keep attracting bad relationships. That can often be because they had attachment trauma in childhood.
I'm trying to fully understand this. So, as parents, we can't necessarily protect our children when they're at daycare, at school. Um, but let's say they're home at night and maybe our child's gone through something, traumatic or emotional. Maybe they got bullied on the playground or something worse. And as long as we're there for them, maybe not right there in the moment, but later in the day, we're a strong support system for them. We listen to them. We, comfort them. We make sure that they feel heard and loved and safe. Is that enough to prevent
Exactly.
that that emotional trauma from sort of taking hold of their physiology?
Yeah, you see, that's the idea. And it was very interesting because that is what is showing is that emotional relational support trumps the event. And you don't want to completely, over protect your children either. And they are going to get exposed to things. They are going to have difficult, challenging experiences, and they are going to in adulthood as well. But how we can prepare them for that is exactly what you say. It's being able to connect to and have that child feel like they were seen, understood, supported, which prevents this when that doesn't happen and a bad thing happens. The sort of the trauma brain turns that event into something like, this is always going to be this way. That's what happens with the
Mm-hmm.
trauma brain when there's no support. It kind of this switch like flips, and somehow that trauma has become like, oh my god, this has happened, and it's always going to be that way. And
Well,
that's when you end up in really destructive behavior patterns, and because you can't get rid of the gut wrench, you can't get rid of the kind of the bad feelings about this thing that happened, and that can lead down the addiction route, by the way, as well.
is that also related to if a child is, like, let's say, molested and they end up blaming themselves?
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. If a child hasn't got the support network to support them through that and to have a discussion about it, and be protected by key caregivers, if that support network isn't there, that's when the trauma is worse, and it has it'll physically last for longer. And that's not to say in adulthood they can't also reverse that, and you can. So there are people who've been through horrendous childhoods. Actually, just think about Oprah Winfrey, very
Mm-hmm.
sexual molestation, and she's kind of a great example who somebody who went through a lot in childhood and completely
Right.
turned that around.
Maya
So
Angelou as well.
yes, you
She
could find people, can't you? Yeah,
Exactly. You can find the people who, you know, grabbed their past and said, I'm not defined by it." But they had to do the
yes,
work. They did the emotional work, which is what you're an advocate of.
exactly. Yes, this is it. So I often, when I'm working with people, I'm getting them to self-reflect and start to think, is there a connection to certain things that happened to me in childhood that could have changed? Do I remember certain things that happened, that either relational trauma? You see, this is the other thing that's confusing. Like, there may have not have been an event like bullying, or that may not have happened, but you can still just have parents who weren't there for you. Just for whatever reason, they could have been distracted by, they might have had their own issues, could have been depressed, could have had, and just weren't emotionally there for you. There's multiple reasons why that could be, often not done on purpose, and just, sometimes it's like a death in the family, like it may have been a sibling that died and that took all the attention. And that is nobody's, was overtly trying to neglect the remaining children, but it often can be a cause of emotional neglect in the remaining children. And it has an impact on the child across the rest of their life. So yeah, the reflection process is very important. So when we're sort of looking at a chronic complex illness, think about your psycho-emotional state as well as your physical health. And, do you have a sense of safety and comfort? Do you have, tendencies to being a bit of a perfectionist or an overgiver? Do you tend to be, a lot of therapists and mums are like this. They like put everybody else before themselves, kind of they discount their own needs. And that's often because it comes from childhood where they kind of were ignored. And then they found that the way that they could get attention was by giving love first. But they had to give it first. They had to be the giver, and then they got attention back. And that's how they learned to survive. So it's surviving childhood. But that survival, which is very appropriate and it got them through childhood, then becomes detrimental when it kind of gets out of control and the person isn't taking care of themselves enough to the point where they're actually developing a physical chronic complex illness, and they need to change their lifestyle. So, and there's other types. I talk a lot about, the achiever type that can often come from parents who had very high expectations, perfectionists, parents who were very critical. So the way that they thought, it was basically their sense of self-love was coming from, that was being defined by caregivers. And they didn't realize how deep that went into the child to the point where they became, a human doing rather than a human being.
Right.
So, yeah.
I'm imagining cultures like South Korea, where the children are driven from a very young age to study. I just read a book about the education systems around the world and how vastly different they are from our own, but that they study so much that South Korea the government had to have a law in place that study centers close, I think, at 11 at night, so that these 14-year-old kids or 16-year-old kids would finally go home, because after school they would then go to their tutors, these study centers, and they would study madly through the night, and they would kind of fall asleep in classes that weren't important, just to catch a few hours, and because if the entrance exam into college is only like 3 really good universities, and if you get in the top 3 universities, you're kind of set for life. And so as students, they're told, and they're pushed by their families, like what you do in the next, in your elementary all the way through high school career is going to set you up for the rest of your life. So you have to basically sacrifice your life now for the good of later. And I always worry, like, that's setting up the entire country for adrenal fatigue.
Yes, yeah, you're absolutely right. And there's data that will back that up as well. In Japan, they have similar issues there too. And we don't often talk about the cultural aspects of illness, do we? And yet the culture has a profound impact. So again, it's the social context again, which has a profound impact on our physical health. Third generation survivors of the Holocaust victims have the same physiological and psychological expression as their grandparents that were in the Holocaust. So that the trauma is intergenerationally inherited. So you'll see this wherever there's war and famine. You'll see like it goes down. And the science papers are also absolutely proving that epigenetically, that information gets passed down.
Mm-hmm.
So when you think about, even just think about the Me Too movement right now, and kind of some of the stuff that's been, we're in a patriarchal society. It's slowly dissipating, but it still is. And think about the cultural context. It's very interesting that you're 50% more likely to have an ACE if you're a woman than a man, so that's leading, and things like autoimmune disorder, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia are all female dominant illnesses that have a very stress impact related issue. So you can't disconnect. You can't take somebody out of their social and cultural environment. Here's another example as well. Take chronic fatigue. The stigma around an illness, like the
Mm-hmm.
beliefs of the conventional medicine system around a chronic complex illness, has a profound impact on the person, whether they feel, it's the same thing. Are they feeling supported, seen, connected with, and emotionally supported? Chronic fatigue was seen as like you're making it up in the early days, and they were stigmatized as deviant psychiatric behavior. So not only did you, you had the trauma of being ill, then you have the trauma of the stigma of what people were going through. And it's very interesting. The people who've studied it made correlations between that and the HIV experience. So they found that the stigma involved, that kind of social stigma is suppresses your immune system. So they showed studies that where you have increased social stigma around an illness, you're more likely to die from it, obviously, because you're suppressing the immune system. So
Wow.
that's a really key piece to take away. There was a massive study done of over 300,000 people, showing that social support is a greater predictor of survival than your body mass index, how much you smoked, how much exercise you did, your cholesterol levels, and whether you smoke 15 cigarettes a day or not. It was social support. So this aspect, it comes into childhood and adulthood. So if you have this pervasive sense of kind of loneliness, isolation, core feelings of shame, that is shortening your lifespan as much as, eating McDonald's and smoking every day. And that's the takeaway that people need to kind of know. So your emotional well-being, just, if you're in an environment where you hate your job every day, like you're not happy where who you're married to, and you hate your job, and then you've got this chronic illness, and you go and see the practitioner, and they're like trying to fix it with a supplement to boost your immune system. I mean, think about the wider context. So yeah, it's kind of widening. It's not only practitioners where we need to widen our kind of viewpoint of when we see somebody in front of us, you need to look at the whole picture, the social context, the early life context, their psycho-emotional state towards themselves, and how optimistic they are about recovery as well. And then when you're looking at all that, you still want to do the biochemistry stuff, but just in that context.
Now, why is it that women experience more adverse childhood events? Is it that they're more likely to be sexually abused, physically abused, and then now understanding that it's not necessarily the ACE in and of itself that causes the long term trauma or sets you up for long term trauma. It's that the who's around to help you with the aftermath, who's around to help you support you. So if, like you said, if that child, a female child, has a strong support system, and they've been through something traumatic, then it's going to dissipate. It's not going to sort of settle in the neurology and in the body, and kind of be a predictor of their future pathology. But if
Yes.
they have a poor support system, or if they're not heard, I have a friend in junior high confided in me that her father and then stepfather raped her, and she was raped from age 3 to 16.
Wow.
And her mother didn't believe her, because when the father was incarcerated, then the mother remarried and the stepfather started doing it. The mother did not believe her, and even a psychologist didn't believe her. They said, you're just imprinting what happened with your father onto the stepfather. There's no way. And so finally he was actually caught. But that support system just wasn't there for her. No one believed her, and it really messed with her. And so I can see that, like, when there's no support system, when you're not believed, or no one's just there for you, or they just don't hear you. I mean, that can really screw someone up, and of course, I don't think someone's ever broken. I really believe that no matter where we are in life, we can use these techniques to heal. It'll take time, and it'll take a commitment to finding the right practitioners. One technique that I'd recommend also is timeline therapy, which is derived out of NLP, and it's also just like emotional freedom technique, a highly successful technique to heal unresolved trauma from the past. But your point is, it's not necessarily the trauma that happened, it's what was there afterwards, to what system was there to support them. And I kind of see culturally that we are not myself, but like we as a society are more likely to comfort a female child and tell a male child to suck it up and stop crying. So I'm surprised. I would think that maybe male children are less supported emotionally because we're inclined to tell them to that they just need to stop crying about it.
There's male and female wounding, cultural wounding. So you're onto a good point. I mean, when you were asking like why do females seem to have more ACEs? I can only tell you that's the data, and we can get
Mm.
into like the whys. There is, we live in a wounded society. We live in a wounded planet. This is what I've come to conclude, that we're not an emotionally evolved society. We're not really that civilized, especially when you think about how we treat our children and the ACEs and so on.
Yeah.
And the male wounding is what you said there, is men are not as taught to shut down emotionally, which probably can make them more abusive, by the
Mm-hmm.
way. And then women are just, it's culturally, you can see that across the planet, and it's more strongly in areas like, um, places like Saudi Arabia, where those kind of cultures still exist as a male dominant patriarchy, and women are should be seen and not heard. And it still seeps into the West to some degree as well. But then, it's a similar to, there's still overtones of racism towards Black people in certain areas. It's worse than others as well. So it's just, it's the level of development of consciousness, of human consciousness, partly, and what we're as a society trying to balance out. But what we see happening at a societal level is often it starts in the home. Most people, I think they say most murder is caused at home. The worst
Yes.
thing that happens is at home. It's kind of, we put up with things at home that we would never put up with at work. And there's this sort of tribal aspect to consider as well. Like, I think this aspect of needing to feel, if you think about it from a ancestral perspective, if you were sort of rejected from the tribe, and it's the same in animals as well, that was a risk of death, because in the early days we couldn't survive as an individual. We had to stay in the group to survive. So social exclusion, feeling alienated, rejected, unlovable, all those kind of things, it is directly, we start to basically deteriorate physically as well. It has a massive physical impact on our health. So yeah, it's just the amazing thing. The interesting thing is, like, other people, I call it OP, other people have the most to kind of do, in terms of they can be the most damaging thing, and they can also be the healer as well. So the power of OP, other people, is being profoundly underestimated. So yeah, so we have this male wounding, and the female wound is, she gets punished for being in her power. So and in various ways, because men won't take that. So then that leads to her kind of wounding when she finally steps up into her power. She gets all kinds of problems, including from other women, who are like, oh, who are you to be in your power now? Maybe it's her own mother, who kind of like is looking at her own daughter. That's another wound. It's the mother wound in some cases. So yeah, it's an interesting journey for all of us, but it's such an important area to consider, and the impact of cultural beliefs, not just your own individual belief about yourself, and say, your beliefs about your own health and your ability to recover. Just think about the placebo effect, have a profound impact. But then there's also this cultural impact as well that is often playing out in people, and it's so prevalent that they don't consider it. And they don't realize it's actually causing them stress, or somebody's it's just, we put up with so much from parents because it's taboo to stand up and say, hey, that's behavior is not acceptable. Energy vampires are real. Energy vampires are real. And if you don't detoxify your relationships, sometimes you're not going to get better. Usually with a lot of people I work with, part of recovery and improvement is a release of certain people that are not supportive, that are absolutely toxic. And there's often a journey that people need to go through to release lower energetically vibrating people, or otherwise you're not going to get to your full health potential.
So you started off helping people with chronic fatigue to heal the root cause on the emotional and physical level, and lifestyle and everything, really pulling back the onion layers, and finding there's so many connections. It's really fascinating because you're helping the endocrine system, you're helping the nervous system, you're helping, your emotional body, your energetic body, and you're seeing every time you um, take care of every aspect of our human experience, that there's deeper and deeper healing going on. What about autoimmune though? You mentioned autoimmune. Have you been helping people with autoimmune to fully heal?
Yes, so autoimmune is a very interesting one because, and this is where, if we look at stress psychology, like, or stress physiology, one of the biggest thing, stress affects every organ and system in the body. So it resets the stress system. So the glucocorticoid receptor, the expression changes. So you have a lowered threshold response. So you basically, from the date trauma happens or stress happens, you can actually epigenetically mean that you just need less of a stressor to have a stress response, is what I'm saying. So that those kind of thing changes. It literally, the brain changes. It goes into a state of being more like kindled, so it's more easily triggered. And the sympathetic side of the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, gets upregulated at the cost of this parasympathetic side of the nervous system. Now, this is really important because the parasympathetic side, which includes the vagus nerve, is the rest, digest, detoxify, feed, and breed side. And all of that, the vagus nerve being one of the biggest, probably the biggest nerve in the parasympathetic side, that literally gets down regulated. When you're in a hypervigilant state because you don't feel safe inside, your vagus nerve gets down regulated. Now, what's really important is the brain gut connection is the vagus nerve, like the communication system is the vagus nerve. So when somebody is in stress, the vagus nerve, what's going on in the brain will translate into the gut. And there are absolutely studies showing that when you, for example, replicate attachment trauma in, like, say, rhesus monkeys, within hours they develop intestinal permeability. It changes the gut.
Wow.
So stress changes the bacteria in the gut, leads to intestinal permeability. And when you stimulate the vagus nerve, they've done this in experiments, it closes the junctions in the intestinal lining. So when you stimulate the vagus nerve, it heals the gut lining. Now, I'm going that direction because that is one of the core pillars of the requirements of autoimmune disease, usually, is that there's usually leaky gut present. So it's one of those things that's present, isn't it? Usually a toxin, there's usually leaky gut. And as soon as you have leaky gut, then you start to, the immune system is starting to go haywire. Things are getting through the gut lining that shouldn't. Maybe it's gluten or whatever. And then the immune system kind of mistakes sort of gluten and starts to attack the thyroid, because it's thinking that it's trying to attack gluten, and it's very similar to the thyroid gland. And now you've got Hashimoto's. Okay, so I've just told that's the whole route in. It started with stress. It started in the brain. The vagus nerve then changed. That changed the gut bacteria. Then you have leaky gut, and then the immune system is now out of whack, and then it's attacking things that it shouldn't attack. But one of the things that I find really interesting about the autoimmune piece, just consider this for a second. I'm talking about just feeling comfort and safety, a sense of optimism, safe, optimistic, happy, safe, comfortable in your body. That's what we're talking about. But we're talking about being in your body as well, not kind of out of it, because a lot of people are disassociated. And the problem is, if we have had like stress and we've had trauma in childhood, we often lose our boundaries. We lose boundaries, and we lose what is safe or not with other people. It's also, by the way, while we'll keep attracting abusive people, by the way. So our boundaries are out of whack. We sort of lose our ability to identify, because we attached to an abusive person as a childhood because we had no choice. We had no resources. We were a child. We couldn't reject the parent who might have been doing bad things, but we lost our boundaries and we don't know what is safe or not. How interesting that is exactly what the immune system's doing in autoimmunity. It's like the immune system does what you're doing emotionally, which it can't recognize what is safe or not. So it's mirroring your emotional place. So often when we see somebody without boundaries, like who doesn't know what's safe or not, and they're hypervigilant all the time, okay, we'll just, I don't know, we'll just attack everything. We'll attack things that we don't need to attack. And then we start self-attacking. So it's very interesting. I think there's more layers to it. But, we could talk about, I just mentioned how, for example, biochemically, how stress, expresses biochemically and sets the body up for autoimmunity. Or it can also be even more subtle than that. And perhaps it's the body's way of expressing what's happening emotionally. There's a very interesting area as well when mitochondrial dysfunction is a big area right now. It's to do with anti-aging. It's a big interest in fatigue. So these mitochondria, the little parts of the cells that produce ATP, which is the powerhouse of the cell. So it's very important. It's the energy producing part of all our cells. And it's very interesting. They found there's something called the cell danger response, which is a really amazing recent area of research, where basically it turns out the mitochondria don't just produce ATP, they also have a defense job. So they're part of the immune system, if you like. And if they sense stress and threat, they will just shut down energy production because it's not important. It's the same as when we're in stress. Reproduction isn't important. When you're stressed, digestion's not important. When you're stressed, energy production, long-term energy production isn't important. The only thing that's important is running away from the saber-toothed tiger. And remember, the body doesn't differentiate, doesn't realize there isn't a saber-toothed tiger in the room. But if you're always on high alert, your nervous system thinks you're about to be attacked at any moment, then that system is chronically switched on. And that's why, eventually you're going to get something. If something physical is going to manifest, whether it's an autoimmunity. So that's the CDR, the cell danger response. In fact, the people who wrote the paper said early life stress could trigger it. And I was like, yes, that's it. That's the connection. Early life stress, emotional trauma is one of the factors that would switch off mitochondrial function. It would lead directly to post-exertional fatigue and chronic fatigue syndrome and burnout. So it's just another way of connecting.
Absolutely. And further understanding sort of what we've observed in the mind-body connection, how I've always taught what the fight or flight response is, so the autonomic nervous system has those two branches, which you've illustrated, that we have the rest and digest, which we want to be in as much as possible, because that sets our body up for healing. The body's sort of always in wonderful healing mode, and has the immune system on, healthy regulation. We're going through life in an optimal way. And then, but we're supposed to have the ability to run away from the saber-tooth tiger, or run away from the bear, or jump out of a burning building and survive, or, pull a car off of a person. You hear those stories about how like a mom pulls a car or a tree off of their child. They shouldn't have had the strength to, but we're given the superhuman strength when the stress response kicks in. And that's exactly what you just said, is that when we have a stressor, then the sympathetic nervous system response comes in and takes over. The adrenaline kicks in. The body shunts blood away from the organs towards the limbs. So now the limbs are fully oxygenated, and they can do the running or the jumping or the lifting to survive. But what's also really neat is that the body shunts blood away from the logic centers of the brain. So when we're in stress, and we're only supposed to be in stress for like a minute, right? We're only supposed to be in a survival mode during a crisis, and that's supposed to go away. But because of past trauma, and like you said, it's getting triggered, then, and we're perceiving now, and because of our childhood, we set up everything, our neurology set up everything as feeling as though threats are going to we're going to always be up against a threat. Then it's just hypersensitive, and so now we hear a horn beep, and now our adrenaline goes through the roof, or we're just very high cortisol all the time. And that means that we don't have full access to our brain, because the body shunts blood away from those logic centers. So now we're just in that sort of monkey brain. We're in that amygdala response, and we're not really our whole self.
Exactly. And you've said that really clearly, beautifully, because when you're in the amygdala response, your kind of emotions are in charge. and you lose your rational ability, and because it's switched down. And if you are in that state chronically, then you are in a state of, amygdala hijack all the time to some degree, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that then, and this is where like rational talking therapies have limitations, because you can't talk yourself out of fear, you can't talk yourself out of being in love. You need to use other things, and this is where NLP works more unconsciously. It's a better technique as well. There's loads of other techniques that you can do too, but you kind of from that, getting into kind of like practical solutions for people as well. At the end of the day, the upshot is, if you're wanting to have optimum energy, optimum health, just make sure you're in a healing state and not in a chronic stress state. And
Mm-hmm.
it's so simple and yet not easy. And this is just what we're saying, is you want to cultivate being in a healing state. If you're in chronic stress because you've already had a nervous system reset from childhood, or you're living a life of high stress, you've got deadlines, if you're running around doing emails, like kids at school, you've tons of people, you never stop and you're stressed all the time. PET scans have shown of the brain that that's the equivalent impact on the brain of one ACE. If you're, that kind of busy, that's how people usually use the word stress, isn't it? Like being busy in their life and answering emails and kind of just never settling down. So all of those types of things, obviously there are adult stressors as well. All of that stress stuff basically is directly preventing optimum health. So if you want to stay in a healthy state of mind and energy, you want to trigger as much as possible the healing state. And that means being out of stress and in a vagus nerve stimulated place. So are you in a stress state or a healing state? And really that's what it comes down to. And the techniques that you would use to get into that place will vary from person to person. If it's been early stress and it's been a long-term kind of issue, you might want to have a thing where you would talk about what happened in childhood. Some people have never talked to anybody about what happened in childhood. Just talking to somebody can be a stress release and can actually release the stress that is being stored in the body because of that event that was never addressed.
Would it be incredibly healing for them? Like, let's say they've never talked about their childhood, and they might have built it in their mind, like, well, it's not that big of a deal. I feel silly even talking about it. Like, why should I complain about it? It's in the past. Like, they've just kind of justified or downplayed their childhood. But if they currently have chronic fatigue or they currently have autoimmune, then this is a necessary step for them to complete their healing. And if they go to a counselor, let's say they interview a few counselors, they find one they really like and they resonate with and they feel safe with, and then they pour their heart out and they just, share everything. That might be the first experience in their life where they have felt supported because they're feeling heard, they're feeling understood, they're feeling respected, they're in a safe space, So would that really help them to rewire, since they maybe never had that level of support?
Yeah, and that's one step and it's one part of the piece of the jigsaw. And for some people that might be extremely healing. Perhaps that's all they needed to do. For others, talking and even writing about journaling has been shown to absolutely, it can help. If you write about a very traumatic experience from childhood, it can actually help the healing process. Like journaling has been found to do that too. So that's part of it. Some of it, if there's been this nervous system reset, and you'll know, if you've got a tendency to be, you're triggered into anger very easily, or triggered into anxiety very easily, or you're triggered into depression very easily. That's more, there might be deeper stuff where the biochemistry in the nervous system have actually changed. So, and this is where it gets interesting, because there are actually biochemical interventions you can do that will actually help that. So, I know it's very basic, but things like eating a diet for balancing blood sugar can actually eradicate half the anxiety problems. So if it's coming from blood sugar imbalances, for example. So I think you might know about, a simple diet. The simple thing people could do is start to have a protein breakfast. It's one of the simplest things that can be life-changing for people, just to start eating enough food at breakfast, eating enough protein, cutting out the starchy carbohydrates and and overly sweet foods. It's a very simplistic thing, but this is some of the foundational steps. And so there are both dietary, lifestyle, and psychological interventions you can do that actually start to rebalance the nervous system. And here's another thing that people can do. And I bet if people started to do this, actually did what I'm going to say, it can be life changing for them. If you've got some kind of illness and you're also emotionally kind of all over the place, start going to bed at 9:30 at night. I know that might sound crazy, but it absolutely works, and it has changed the life of so many of my clients. So it's to do with circadian rhythm management as well. So when we align our bodies with when it's sun shining outside and darkness at night, we were designed as sort of beings to have campfire light in the evening, for example. So when we've got our computers and iPhones and lights sending out blue light, it's stimulating at a time when we should be getting to our destimulated state. So there are these blue blocking glasses that you can get on Amazon now, blue blockers. I'm a total fan. I've had people transform their sleep. Sleep's so important. It's really hard to balance your emotions and feel less anxious. If you get bad sleep, you're going to doubt everything. You're going to have more anxiety, depression, and everything. It's just, if you notice you have a bad night's sleep, everything's worse. So sleep's really important, and going to bed at 9:30. I always say that, especially if you've got a healing issue. This is one of the things that you need to do, is start to go to bed earlier. And if you're worried about loss of productivity of things you were doing late at night, it won't matter, because you'll be 10 times more productive the next day. You'll get up earlier. And here's another major tip: your morning routine. Your morning, I have my 7 steps to supercharged, and it's 7 things that I get clients to do in the morning, even if you only got a minute to do each one. So it takes 7 minutes, but ideally 30 minutes. And for people who are really committed, an hour of power, you could call it. But it might be in the morning. There's 7 things I get people to do to set up their nervous system for the day. And they're all things that increase heart rate variability, which is a measure of the vagus nerve. We love the vagus nerve. We want the vagus nerve to be stimulated. We want to have a high heart rate variability. So these sort of things, there's so many things you can do, by the way, that increase heart rate variability, which is it's stimulating the healing state. That's what we're doing. That's all we're doing. So everything from, these are all the things that will stimulate the vagus nerve that you could use as an example: gratitude journaling, deep breathing, deep slow breathing, yoga, exercise. I think there's so many different things. Positive journaling, positive social relations, laughter, positive affirmations, singing, actually humming. Did I mention meditation? Interestingly, a cold shower stimulates the parasympathetic side of the nervous system. So you might be interested to know that green leafy vegetables also increase heart rate variability.
Yes.
By the way, most therapies, cranial sacrals, sensory motor psychotherapy, kind of somatic experiencing, some of the trauma therapies, CBT, all increase, science studies show, all increase heart rate variability. All the different types of meditation and yoga, all the different types have been found to increase those things. So, and also emotional freedom technique, EFT. And what's really interesting about when you stimulate the vagus nerve, the science shows that the higher the emotional state that you're in, the higher the heart rate variability. And that has been absolutely scientifically shown. You have a higher vagal tone when you're in an uplifted emotional state. And they've shown that scientifically. In fact, HeartMath has shown a 75% correlation between looking at your heart rate variability, and they can tell what emotional state you're in by looking at the heart rate variability. So, which is pretty incredible. So anything which lifts you emotionally, time in nature, water therapy as well, by the way, are all things that will increase heart rate variability. Tai Chi, Qigong will also do it. There's no set program for everybody. Everybody's different. Some people hate Tai Chi and love yoga, other people something else. But it's just getting something you can do that works for you, and that you can do in your morning routine, like setting up some kind of 5 steps to feeling fabulous thing that you do every morning. that's only for you. Oh, by the way, essential oils. So sending out essential oils. You can do your meditation, some gratitude journaling, some positive EFT, something like that with the essential oils going in the morning. set the intention for how you want to feel for the rest of the day. Have a positive visualization. That's another one. Positive visualization, perhaps something like that, which will give you an uplifted, optimistic, feeling safe, optimistic, and enthusiastic about the day and your health. Visualizing your body working perfectly, digestion working fabulously, strong legs, everything working well. All of that stuff should be part of a daily routine. So early to bed, kind of earlier to rise. Sunshine, by the way, massively important. It's a huge thing. It lifts mood, boosts serotonin, and just time out from a circadian rhythm management point of view. That's like Harvard research. It's really very important as well. But getting outside, getting connected to the earth as well, by the way. So getting the earth's electromagnetic rays. So the earth has frequencies that it's producing, pulsed electromagnetic frequencies, massively important for health. The Schumann resonance. When people don't get those resonances, they start dying, like astronauts in space actually have to have pen machines. So yeah, that's just giving you a ton of things that you could do. So
you just rattled off like the most powerful list of therapies. I think if choose any 5 of them that you most enjoy, and not only would someone be able to reverse chronic adrenal fatigue or autoimmune, but they would set themselves up for a life of low stress and sending the body every morning into that healing state, into the most optimal healing state, lifting their mood, which lifts their outlook on life. Our behavior is dictated by our internal representation of our life. And so by basically how we perceive our life, that's what's going to beget our behavior, and our behavior ultimately begets our results. So if we're in a crappy mood, we won't achieve the results we set out to achieve. We'll sit on the couch instead of train for that marathon, or we will be passed up for the raise, or we won't study, and then we'll fail or get poor grades. I mean, it's just, it all starts with our internal view of ourselves and our world, because we won't excel, we won't create behavior that has us excel in life if we're just feeling down about ourselves. And if that's our normal, if that's been our norm for years, right? Negative self-talk, right? Or being the martyr in a relationship, or, looking to self-sacrifice so that I could get love from other people, because that's the only way I know how to get love, right? Like all those things you've explained, then I'm just wasting my energy and not living a life that's fully fulfilled, right?
yeah, yeah. And if you're feeling low, and with those things, you will have lost feeling good. And the point is, if you don't feel good, your body knows, and it keeps the score. That's actually the title of Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's book, which is The Body Keeps the Score. So the mind and the body are one thing. So if you're in a low emotional tone, you're kind of feeling joyless, and it might be for any of those reasons that you're around miserable people. You're always having to give up your own needs to be accepted by others. All of those things that we said, being too stressed, having too much to do, too much responsibility, not getting enough support, all of those kind of, whatever it is, doing a job you hate. That is, you're also impacting your health. Your body and the mind are the one thing. So it's the first thing when someone's coming in to see me, I'm like, how happy are you? In your life in general, and with who you are and what you're doing in the world and who you're hanging out with. And consider all of those. So you want to be cultivating a very high emotional state, set it up on a daily basis, and then it's practice and time, because some of those things we've talked about, if you've been doing them for 20 years, or 30 years, and it's been there for a while, you have to have compassion to yourself through that. You didn't know, any better. There's no blame or judgment involved here whatsoever. That if you're in blame and judgment about sort of noticing all those things, that's part of the pattern that you learned. It's when people discount their own needs and go, oh, I don't think what happened to me in childhood is very important. Well, that was the message that was sent to you in childhood. It doesn't matter, and you're not important. So you see, so it's part of it. So it's this kind of emotional alchemy. It is a knack, it's a different thing. It's learning, we can start getting, I've had people like where we want to let go of the self-judgment. So then they find themselves judging themselves because of being judgmental. Yeah. So you get then it's the same with panic attacks, are people getting frightened of feeling fear. So you fear, and you get this spiral thing happening. So at some point you need to put the ceiling on it, and you need to be able to start cultivating. Actually, you're kind of reparenting almost. And that takes time and diligence and commitment to doing it. The same as like changing your diet. That's one thing I will say. If you're, dealing with something that's, a diagnosed disease state, it does take commitment and diligence. But you can totally get there. You can change the neuroplasticity. The brain can be changed. Absolutely. But yeah, it takes sort of this daily practice. So those kind of things, those things I mentioned, to be doing on a daily basis, that needs, whether somebody has major trauma from childhood or is just a little bit stressed and they're doing too much, and kind of feeling a bit tired because they know they're taking on too much. That daily routine is relevant for both of those types of people. So everybody needs to be doing that. How deep you go with other trauma therapies just depends on you and what you need. And one therapy works for one person great, and another person won't do so well on a certain type of therapy. But that's the exploration process, and you'll find out who you are in that process as well. Some therapies don't work for people who are very disassociated, so that they tend to minimize their emotional state and always rationalize. That was something, one of my things that I would do. And there were certain therapies that wouldn't work for me because I needed the therapist to say, I asked you what you felt and you told me what you think. And I had to learn to connect back. It's from emotional neglect. It's quite hard to sort of, oh, that's what I feel. Okay, right, that's my feelings. And a lot of people, we don't, how many people can remember being asked a lot how they felt in childhood? How do you feel? It's not something we've cultivated in society. So it just takes time. And yeah, there's no blame, and have compassion for yourself. And there is absolutely, and this is something you referred to before, there's absolutely a part of us that is unbroken. That's absolutely my belief as well. There's a part of you in this present moment, get a little bit spiritual about it, but there's, in the present moment, you're not in the mind, in fear, or in the past, or in the future. And in this present moment, when you're grounded in your body, there's no saber-toothed tiger, and there you can access that part of you that's unbroken. And in fact, that is part of trauma therapy, is learning how to ground and be present in the present moment, because right here, right now, everything's okay. So and the body knows how to heal itself. When you just get the environment going, you support the environment in the right way, set up the healing state, have absolute trust that there's a part of you that's unbroken. This is where you'll start to slowly transform the emotional states, especially if you're in a chronic low emotional state. You can slowly start to alchemize that up, and you'll slowly start to see changes in the biology as well. Takes courage, commitment, and diligence, but it's totally doable.
I had this mantra once years ago that stated, you are whole, complete, and perfect. You are whole, complete, and perfect. Because I think, we would, some people who have had trauma self-identify with it and hold on to it, and to acknowledge, like you said, there's a part of you that is whole, complete, and perfect, that's unbroken, and you can put those pieces back together. And like you said, reparenting. It's going to take being kind to ourselves, and making time and room and space for ourselves, and making a space where we are supported, creating that support system. We might have to get new friends, or hire professionals, but we need to create that support system for ourselves, and do those daily tasks. I'm going to make sure that the show notes of today's podcast at learnchild.com have the entire list that you rattled off, which is an amazing different actionable steps that people can take to manage their stress, to stimulate the vagus nerve, to increase heart rate variability. I recently just interviewed a person on heart rate variability, so there's like it's a whole episode on that, which is really exciting. So listeners can check that one out to understand more about it. What I'd like to know from you, though, is there a specific heart rate variability monitor that you best like, or you find with someone just getting any heart rate variability monitor?
I tend to, I'm a fan of Heart Maths one. I think it's the EM wave. I find that's very useful. I find that not too dissimilar though from things like the Muse headband. That's actually not so much heart rate variability, but these kind of feedback machines, they're just useful. I found them to be helpful. Anything which is showing you a picture or through sound or visually about the sort of subtleties of where you're at emotionally and in your nervous system and how balanced and calm you are or not, it can be a real learning curve. It can be a real like, eye opener of like, wow, okay, I'm really out of balance right now. And then sort of realizing at other times when you're really balanced, and then you start to connect in, oh, when I do that, that, and that, I'm always out of balance. But when I do these things, I can always really meditate and my heart rate variability is always really good. So I'm a fan of, yeah, those two. I happen to have both those two ones. Yeah, so I do think that some of these wearables are useful. Um, and as well, like just anything that's kind of getting you more in tune with yourself, really anything which gets you connected back into your body and noticing how you feel and learning to tune in, anything that supports that is a good thing.
Absolutely. I have a friend who was fighting cancer with natural medicine and diet, and every month she'd get her blood work to see whether the tumor was growing or shrinking. And she was able to stop the growth, and she had it all kind of under control, and it was sort of maintaining. And then she had one stressful month, and she went back and she got her blood work, and it was like huge spike, out of control. And all, I mean, it was emotional stress. But
Yes.
that was enough to shut down her immune system, enough to where the cancer was able to continue growing, and where she had actually stopped the growth, shrunk it a little bit, kind of maintained it, but she was on top of, basically on top of the cancer naturally. And then just 1 month of emotional stress. I mean, it's so, we we need to take it more seriously, that when something stressful happens, we lose a few nights of sleep, or even just get some less sleep, or we're worried or anxious or thinking about something, like that is enough to, especially if we've had um aces in our childhood, right? And also then a lack of support system, sort of setting ourselves up, then that could really tip us over the edge. And then, like you said, someone has a virus, and then all of a sudden they have chronic adrenal fatigue. They think that was the kickoff, but it wasn't. That it was actually a lifetime setting themselves up for it. Have you? I'd love to hear some stories of success. Do you have anyone that through doing all the therapies that you recommend, that they were able to reverse cancer, or do you have any incredible stories you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of people. Yeah, I mean, I actually was thinking some of the people that use, either I've trained with them now, or they've become practitioners themselves, and have like, for example, came through our clinic originally and then went off and became coaches and practitioners themselves. I've seen everything. I've seen people who, and you never know, like you think, oh, somebody's housebound and they've been ill for 8 years and spent many of those years, very limited. I mean, in a traumatic way, not just a bit ill, but had to give up their job and all of this kind of thing. And then actually, slowly but surely, over a year or two's sort of period of time, be able to slowly recover to the point where they're back to 100% and back at work. We've had people, climb, start doing treks to Everest, that were from the clinic, for example. But yeah, this sort of too many to mention almost. What I would say is interesting about all of those people, especially the ones who are ill for longer, like kind of getting towards 7, 8 years, like, because I've dealt with a really, I spent a lot of time working with very, trying to grab them out of bed and get them back out and up and out and again. There's the commonality between them that there was no way this was going to be their reality. They were absolutely diligent and committed, and they were willing to go and look into everything. So they did the meaning they gave to things. It was almost like I was watching on the sidelines about this amazing person who they sort of looked at their own life, and you could clearly see they'd made a decision like this. they were absolutely 1000% committed that this was not going to be their reality and that they were going to recover. And they would go on and they had a really compelling reason to get better and would go and do, that thing afterwards that they wanted to do. And you could just see that they were empowered and committed and focused on it. And they would go into the spiritual side, and they also experience, this is very important, it's a nice thing to end on actually, there's something called post-traumatic growth. And it's not the same as resilience. If you're resilient to something, it just means you were, maybe a bad thing happened, an event that was negative, and you kind of bounce back really quickly. And yeah, you were resilient, didn't drop you to your knees, you were fine. But for some people, they get a chronic illness and it really brings them to their knees. They lose everything, friends, can't do the job anymore, and all this kind of thing. If you're in that situation, it's an opportunity for post-traumatic growth. And this is where there's a kind of existential crisis that usually happens, where the person is going, why is this such a bad thing that's happening to me? Why is it happening to me? What's the meaning of my life? Who am I? You would have gone through a phase of even wondering why you want to be on the planet. And a lot of the people I know who kind of went from zero to, this level, they went through that, what we call post-traumatic growth, where they reassessed who they were as people, why it happened to them, and turned it into the positive, which is why they went off and became practitioners, used what they knew and became practitioners, for example, or went off to become like documentary filmmakers, this kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, we've dealt with everybody. We've done with so many. We've had people who had PTSD in the police from doing terrible jobs in the police, where it was just completely traumatic, totally ended up with chronic fatigue syndrome, fully recovered. So yeah, it's totally possible. But this post-traumatic growth is something where you can use an event that brings you to your knees, which is what we talked about Oprah Winfrey doing. And you can actually get spiritual growth and be a happier person than the average person for what happened to you. And you actually come out and you'll say that thing that really annoys people when they're not in the right place, but they'll say it's the best thing that ever happened to me. And that's when, like a lot of people who come out of a chronic complex illness say, I can't be the same person I was before. I'll go back to the illness. I have to be this new person. You reinvent yourself basically. And that was the opportunity you sort of had to collapse, if you like, to rebuild and reorganize yourself. So the people that have done that are kind of the ones that I often the most inspired by. I'm inspired by my clients quite often. The ones who really commit and do it, they become different people, which is amazing to observe.
When someone chooses to reinvent themselves and take the things that happened to them in the past, or the thing that's really bothering them, and choose to see that in a new light, just choose to see that as something, like figure out what were the learnings, what was the lesson, what were the positive learnings that I can gain from this that allow me to advance myself. So instead of being angry at that person that did it to them, or angry at that situation, or feeling sorry for themselves, or beating themselves up, or whatever it was, instead look to see, well, what were the positive learnings, and it could be just like, I am strong, and look, I went through that, I can go I'm invincible, I'm unstoppable, I am strong, I'm gonna show the world how powerful I am, and I'm going to go help other people, get into their power, right? So if they take that negativity in their past and they use that to leverage themselves, as a new being that's empowered, are those the most successful people in your program? Do those people like fully recover, no longer have the autoimmune condition, or no longer have chronic adrenal fatigue, or the other diseases that were plaguing them on a physical level, when they heal emotionally?
So I'd say there's a little spectrum. So there's people who are just very diligent. There's a level of diligence, to committing to, they do those things we talked about doing that stimulate vagus nerve. They actually did them, so and a lot of people, they don't take the action, so they don't commit. And so probably the majority of people don't get better, to be really frank, but it's because they don't do the action that's needed. So the ones that are just diligent, you don't have to have been housebound for 8 years. Just kind of just feeling like I'm sick and tired of being tired every afternoon, having to go to bed and nap and, whatever is niggling you. So you're not at the terrible end of health, but you've just got some things, a little bit of diligence and time and commitment, and you'll get there. You'll absolutely change your life, with just doing some of those things. Even if you just did the protein breakfast, go to bed at 9:30, get your morning routine sorted out, do those things, that could be absolutely life changing. And those, it doesn't, you don't have to be absolutely, on the floor with illness to really benefit from doing those things. So I guess, yeah, you'll see the people who will take the action and be diligent. You'll see them get amazing results over time. What inspires me is, I guess, I'm thinking about the very sick people, excuse me, who are, kind of have really been whacked to their knees. And obviously I've worked with a lot of people like that as well. For that group, it is, they do need to do the kind of existential work as well, where they in themselves were able to, as you were alluding to, kind of reframe the circumstance of what happened to them, and didn't give up, you see, like never gave up, and always saw this as, there's something else for me to learn here if I'm not fully 100% yet, but I'll never give up. And that obviously you need that as an essence to keep you propelled forward. And through all the ups and the downs, they still somehow had that trust that they would get there, and they did. So, and I really think that if you have an absolutely powerful, strong intention and you're not allowing this to be your reality, that will start to manifest in the physical body if you're also doing it in a joyful, optimistic state of mind, which is tricky. It can take some time to move into that, but you'll also be led to people, situations, practitioners, modalities that you personally need to recover.
Mm-hmm.
When you give up, that's the only guarantee you're not going to get better, isn't it? So
absolutely. Tell us about your websites. I want to make sure people know how to connect with you. You said you work with people all around the world. Do they work with you through Skype? How does that work?
Yep. So I see clients on Skype. So I think I've probably got clients in about 40 different countries at the moment, or not that many, but I've worked at the moment. Yeah, I've got them all over the world. As long as they speak English and they're in my time zone that works, then yes. And we do Skype, and you can see the information about consultations at nikigratrix.com. On my website there. And yeah, I've got some cool things that I'm going to be, I've got a couple of free reports that people can get. If they go on my website, actually people might be interested. A tab at the top of my website, no opt-in required, is an assessment of your ACE score. It's free. So just tab at the top, it's called ACE score. Just go to that tab. You can read, you can right away, you can start seeing the exact questions that were asked from the science study. And I've extended it. So I've said, okay, this is what they missed out. These are some additional things to consider. And there's a free report on there called the 7 Steps to Healing Emotional Trauma and Building Resilience. So completely free reports on that page. And then there's just on nikigratrix.com, there's also my guide to abundant energy, which kind of sums up what we've been constantly talking about, like this need. I call it the 10 principles of abundant energy and health. And it's kind of where we're talking about this multifactorial approach and some of the foundational principles that you need to heal any illness. And they're kind of like like these foundational principles of what you need in terms of attitude and kind of the mindset side of things. It's all on that website.
Excellent. Well, the link to your website is going to be in the show notes of today's podcast at learntoyourhealth.com. Thank you so much, Niki, for coming on the show today. This has been very enlightening and I hope very helpful for those who are looking to gain their health back, to understand that it's not just a diet and some supplements, although those are great. But
Yes.
if we're just, it's sort of surface level. If we're just trying to heal a physical body, it's kind of like trying to fix a car without ever opening the hood. It's like
Yes.
I'm gonna change the wheels or I'm gonna change the tires and I'm gonna put a new muffler on, and I'm gonna give it a paint job, and then never ever touch the what's underneath the hood, which is exactly what people do when they just change their diet, and that's the only thing they focus on because what's underneath the hood is running the whole show.
Yes. So we're talking about root causes, and diet can be part of the jigsaw puzzle for sure, and it's a useful tool. But yeah, there are some other root causes you might want to look into. It's very true.
Excellent, Nikki. Thank you so much. Is there anything you'd like to say to the listener to wrap up today's interview?
No, I think we've been really comprehensive, and I've given my sort of the most important things about the body knows how to heal itself, and there's a part of you that's unbroken, and don't give up. Those are my ending comments. Thank you so much for having me as well, by the way. It was a real pleasure. Thank you for talking about such an important topic.
Do you feel like you're missing something? Are you searching for the right answers to solve your health issues? Do you feel like you should have more energy and mental clarity? With everything you're doing for your health, you may be missing one key component. Our body needs 90 essential nutrients every day to function optimally. 60 minerals, 12 amino acids, 2 fatty acids, and 16 vitamins each and every day. Because of the farming practices over the last 100 years, most of our food has 60% fewer vitamins and minerals compared to just 50 years ago. So if you aren't eating 8 cups of a variety of fruits and vegetables each day, you may be missing some of your essential nutrients. These are the raw building blocks the body needs to create new healthy tissue, healthy hormones, balanced digestive system, strong muscles, bones and joints, and maintain an optimal functioning nervous system. Especially if you're experiencing more stress, or if you've gone through an illness like an infection, that takes more resources. So if you're not consuming more vitamin C and more of all the 16 vitamins and all the 60 minerals when you're going through more stress, either physical stress, emotional stress, mental stress, those stressors take more nutrients to kind of survive those bumps in the road in life. And over time, that whittles away, that kind of depletes our nutrient tanks, our stores in our body. Without these 90 essential nutrients, things start to break down. Now, you've experienced these breakdowns. Maybe you get migraines, maybe you're exhausted, maybe your hormones are out of balance, your digestion's out of balance, or you have some aches and pains. Maybe you've even been diagnosed with something. You have a series of symptoms, and if those symptoms all look like something, then we can diagnose it, right? That's what MDs can do. MDs will treat these breakdowns with drugs and mask your symptoms. But if your body has a nutrient deficiency, no amount of drugs will fix the problem. 7 years ago, I embarked on a journey to cure my diabetes, infertility, PCOS, high blood pressure, and chronic adrenal fatigue. I felt like I was a mess. Through my research, I found a company that made natural supplements to address these nutrient needs. They formulated their supplements to exceed all standards of quality. Their minerals are the most bioavailable and absorbed by the body that I have ever found. After getting on their protocols for healthy hormones and blood sugar, along with their dietary recommendations for better health, I reversed my type 2 diabetes, I reversed my infertility, I no longer had high blood pressure, my energy and vitality came back, and after 6 years of trying to get pregnant with my husband before we found these supplements, once we got on these supplements, we were able to conceive our wonderful healthy son, who's now 3 years old, and he is amazing, and we would have never had that had we not found this company. Speaking of our son, he's also taking these supplements for optimal health. His pediatrician thinks they're amazing. If you'd like to give these supplements a try and see for yourself if you're experiencing a nutrient deficiency, please go to takeyoursupplements.com. That's takeyoursupplements.com. Their health coaches are phenomenal. I personally know all of them. They're amazing people. And I just want you to know, as my listener, I feel like I need to protect my listeners. I would never promote anything that I didn't 100% believe in and I didn't feel was healthy or good for you. I feel like you're my tribe, and I'm sharing this information. In fact, for the last 2 years, the only reason why I've been doing this podcast is so that I can help as many people as possible gain their health back. And so the health coaches at takeyoursupplements.com, I really trust that they will make sure that you're well taken care of. They will work with you to help determine the best protocol for your nutrient needs and work within your budget. They will also help to implement a holistic protocol that includes supporting a healthy diet and lifestyle. Go to takeyoursupplements.com, fill out the form, and one of their health coaches will get back to you really shortly. And then you guys can schedule a time to talk on the phone, and they will work with you to help you dial in all your nutrient needs. I really look forward to hearing about your experience with them. Please feel free to reach out to me. You can reach out to me in our Facebook group. Go to Facebook, search Learn True Health, and join our group. Let me know what you think about the wonderful health coaches at takeyoursupplements.com. And by the way, when you go to takeyoursupplements.com and you get assigned to a health coach, they're your health coach. You're not going to keep getting a different person every time. You get one person, and they work with you and they hold your hand for months down the road. They're there for you to support you month after month while you're on your nutrient protocol, and they're helping you dial in your nutrient needs. They're really wonderful like that. So I know you'll enjoy your experience with them, and I'd love to hear about your experience with them. Please feel free to, you can email me as well, ashley@learntruehealth.com. I love hearing success stories. Like I said, I've been working with a supplement company for my own health for the last 7 years, and I've reversed so many issues. I love sharing this information because I think that many of you will be able to resolve your issues with nutrition, just like I've seen many people do. With that said, go to takeyoursupplements.com, fill out your information, and a health coach is very excited to start working with you and helping you get your health back.